disinherited for a Bible, so I legally evicted my brother from our $1.5 estate. The reading of the will didn't happen in a mahogany-lined library, with a fireplace crackling in the background, like you see in the movies. Across from me sat my younger brother, Douglas, and his wife, Pamela. Barnes had even opened the file. I was 68 years old, and I was tired. It wasn't the kind of tired you get from a long day of pouring concrete or framing a roof, though I had spent my entire life doing exactly that as a structural engineer and carpenter. It was the kind of deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that settles into your bones after a lifetime of carrying the weight of people who never once asked if your back hurt. Mr. Barnes cleared his throat and adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses, conspicuously avoiding eye contact with me. He had been our family lawyer for over 3 decades. He knew every dark, hidden corner of the Caldwell family history. He knew who drove my mother to her agonizing chemotherapy appointments 3 times a week, while Douglas was finding himself on a backpacking trip across Europe. He knew who patched the Victorian roof during the terrible winter storm of '98. He knew who quietly paid off Douglas's gambling debts 10 years ago, so our father wouldn't have a stress-induced heart attack. But the cold, hard reality of the law doesn't care about moral debts, sweat equity, or sleepless nights. It only cares about the ink. On the paper, Mr. Barnes began to read in a dry, monotone voice that seemed to suck whatever remaining warmth there was right out of the room. To my youngest son, Douglas Caldwell, I leave the family estate located at 2400 Queen Anne Avenue, including all furnishings, antiques, and personal effects. I also leave the vintage 1970 Mercedes convertible and the entirety of my liquid savings account, totaling $250,000. That house was worth at least $1.5 million in the current Seattle market. It was the crown jewel of our family, built by our grandfather, meticulously maintained by me. Douglas had become a millionaire in less than 30 seconds, simply by virtue of being the golden child who could do no wrong. His hands were shaking slightly. To my eldest son, Richard Caldwell, I leave the family Bible that has sat on the living room mantelpiece for 40 years. It is my sincere hope that within its pages he finds the spiritual peace that material wealth cannot provide. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Douglas let out a long breath he had been holding. He turned to me, and the fake, saccharine sympathy in his eyes was worse than if he had simply reached across the table and slapped me across the face. "Rick," he said, using the nickname I hated, his voice dripping with condescension. "I know this is a shock, I do, but you have to understand where Mom and Dad were coming from. They were practical people." Pamela chimed in immediately, her voice sharp, fast, and devoid of empathy. "Absolutely, Richard. I mean, look at your life. You're single, you live simply. You have your little pension from the engineering firm. Douglas and I, well, we have a certain lifestyle to maintain. We have social obligations, charity galas, networking events. The house desperately needs young, vibrant energy. We're already planning to knock down that awful, depressing wall between the kitchen and the dining room to install a granite island. It's going to cost an absolute fortune, but it's necessary for entertaining." I stared at her, feeling a burning, acidic sensation rising in my chest. She was talking about taking a sledgehammer to the beautiful, hand-carved mahogany kitchen my mother had loved, while my father's body was barely cold in the ground. I forced myself to remain calm. Barnes and asked, my voice steady, if that was everything. I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the heavy glass table, even though every muscle in my body was screaming to do exactly that. I simply tucked the wrapped book under my arm and walked out of the conference room. As the heavy wooden door closed behind me, I could hear them whispering. I heard Douglas say, "Well, he took that a lot better than I thought he would." And I heard Pamela giggle, a sharp, piercing sound, adding, "Maybe he finally realized he doesn't deserve anything." The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like a slow descent into the deepest level of hell. My mind was racing, replaying every memory, every sacrifice. Every time I had fixed the ancient plumbing in the dead of winter. Every time I had loaned Douglas thousands of dollars for his startup ventures that inevitably failed, money that was never paid back. Why had my parents done this to me? Was I not the good son? Was I not the one who was always there, year after year, while Douglas sent cheap postcards from exotic beaches. When I reached my 20-year-old Ford truck, Douglas and Pamela were walking out of the building's private executive exit. He jogged over to me while Pamela stood by the curb, checking her makeup in her compact mirror, ignoring my existence. Douglas put a heavy hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but I forced myself not to pull away. "Rick, look, man, I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us," he said smoothly, the way a politician lies. "Mom and Dad loved you, they did, but they knew you. You're soft, Rick. You've always been way too sentimental. They were terrified that if they gave you the house, you would let it rot, because you'd be too afraid to change a single thing. They knew I would take the asset, leverage it, and maximize its value. That's business, Rick. It's not personal. You understand that, right?" I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was dangerously quiet, cold as ice. "Was it business, Douglas, when I emptied my savings to pay for your luxury rehab stint in 2005 so the press wouldn't find out? Was it business when I spent 6 months rewiring the entire Queen Anne house so it would pass the city inspection last year, saving Mom and Dad $30,000? Does Dad know that the only reason that Victorian mansion hasn't slid down the hill is because I personally reinforced the entire concrete foundation a decade ago?" Douglas let out a dry, dismissive laugh. He shook his head, looking at me like I was a pathetic child. "There you go again, Rick, living in the past, always keeping score. That is exactly why you're alone. That is exactly why Dad left the future to me, because I look forward, and you're obsessed with looking backward." Pamela walked over, her designer heels clicking sharply on the concrete. She wrapped her arm possessively around Douglas's waist and looked at me with pure, unfiltered disdain. "Honestly, Richard, you should be on your knees thanking us," she spat. "You've been living in the attic apartment of that house rent-free for 10 years. Do you have any idea what the market rent is for a studio in Queen Anne right now? We checked on Zillow this morning. It's at least $2,000 a month. We did the math. You've leached over $240,000 in free rent living off Mommy and Daddy. Consider that your inheritance. As far as we're concerned, we are practically square." I opened the heavy door of my truck. I tossed the wrapped Bible onto the passenger seat. "Enjoy the house, Douglas," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Just remember what I told you last winter about the drainage system on the north side. If you don't clear those pipes every single month, the basement floods, and the black mold will cost you $50,000 to remediate." Pamela rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Douglas, do not listen to a word he says. He's trying to scare us, so we'll beg him to stay and be our free handyman. We are going to hire professionals, Richard, real licensed contractors with actual vision, not some bitter, retired old man with a rusty tool belt. We are gutting the whole place." Douglas smirked, a cruel, triumphant expression. "She's right. Rick, don't you worry your little head about us. You worry about reading your new book. Maybe you'll find some comfort in there. Oh, and Rick? One more thing." I paused with my hand on the ignition key. "Pamela wants to turn your attic into a state-of-the-art yoga and meditation studio," Douglas said casually. "We need the space, obviously. The lawyer said we legally have to give you reasonable notice to vacate. So, consider this your official verbal notice. You have exactly 72 hours to get your junk out of my house. We have the demolition crew coming bright and early on Monday morning. 72 hours, Rick. Don't make me call the cops to have you escorted off the property. 3 days, 72 hours to erase 10 years of my life. 3 days to find a place to live in one of the most absurdly expensive housing markets in America on a fixed income." I drove straight back to the house on Queen Anne Hill. I had to park on the street because Douglas's new Mercedes was already parked diagonally across the driveway, blocking access to the garage. I walked up the wooden steps. It smelled like my mother's lavender potpourri and my father's cherry pipe tobacco. It felt as though the house itself knew I was now merely trespassing on another man's kingdom. I walked up the narrow, creaking stairs to the third-floor attic. There was a simple twin bed, a sturdy oak desk I had built myself, and a bookshelf overflowing with engineering manuals, structural blueprints, and history books. I gripped the wooden frame, smashed the glass against the side of the metal trash can, and let the photo fall into the darkness amidst the shards. I worked tirelessly through the night. I heard the distinct popping of expensive champagne corks, They were dissecting my family home like a fresh carcass. The next morning, my back was screaming in protest, but I refused to show even a hint of weakness. I was carrying the last heavy black bag down the main staircase. Douglas was standing in the kitchen, nursing a hangover, drinking premium coffee out of my favorite ceramic mug. He saw me, smirked, and pointed toward the front door. "Good, you're up early," he commanded. "Leave all the keys on the counter, and Rick, do not take a single thing that belongs to the house." I spent 2 hours counting the antique silverware and logging the artwork last night, so don't get any bright ideas about a retirement bonus. "Douglas, listen to me carefully," I said, my voice deadly serious. "The retaining wall behind the detached garage is structurally compromised. The soil is shifting. I was planning to reinforce it with steel pilings next month. If you let those idiot contractors dig, or if you bring heavy machinery into the backyard before fixing that wall, the entire slope will slide down onto the neighbor's property. Do not ignore this." Douglas threw his head back and laughed. He poured more coffee and didn't even bother to look at me. "Spare me the doom and gloom lecture, Rick. You are seething with jealousy because I'm going to excavate that entire area and build a heated infinity pool. A pool, Rick, something you could never ever afford in 10 lifetimes. Now get out. Your depressing aura is ruining my morning." I picked up my garbage bag. I stepped out onto the porch. I closed it gently with a soft, definitive click. That subtle sound was the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I threw my bags into the rusty bed of my Ford truck. The Seattle rain was coming down harder now, washing the grime off the concrete sidewalks, but it did nothing to wash away the white-hot anger that was rapidly solidifying in my gut like fast-setting cement. I got into the driver's seat and sat there for a long time, the engine off, the windows fogging up. To Richard, my absolute rock, I scoffed out loud. A bitter, hollow sound. A rock is something you step on to keep your own shoes clean while crossing the mud. That was the entirety of my existence. I shoved the key into the ignition, ripped the truck out of park, and drove away from Queen Anne Hill. The neon sign buzzed ominously, missing 2 letters. I picked up the Bible, my grip tightening until my knuckles turned white. I was going to pitch it into the garbage and finally be done with the Caldwell name forever. But as I held it high in the air, the heavy book slipped slightly in my grasp, falling open. It didn't fall open to a random, meaningless page. It fell open toward the back, landing heavily in my hand. The back leather cover felt thick, much thicker than a standard binding should ever be. And running precisely along the inside seam, hidden in the crease, the leather was peeling up a fraction of a millimeter. I slowly lowered my arm. He would never ever allow a damaged spine to sit on his mantelpiece. I brought the book closer to the harsh, yellow light of the bedside lamp. A deliberate, surgically precise slice made with a razor blade. I sliced it open. I peeled back the leather flap. I had foolishly, desperately hoped for a hidden stash of cash, something to get me out of this depressing motel. But then I saw something glinting in the dim light. Wrapped tightly around the key was a piece of lined notebook paper, folded into a tiny, precise square. I unfolded the paper, but it was legible. It read, "If you are reading this, it means Douglas took the house." I prayed he would finally share, but I will not fail you. I stopped breathing. The sound of the rain lashing against the motel window faded away. I forced my eyes to read the next lines. "The will, Mr. He inherited the house, Richard. He owns the wood, the glass, the bricks, and the foundation." My eyes raced to the bottom of the page, my pulse roaring in my ears. Douglas owns the structure, and the 99-year ground lease expires exactly 48 hours after my funeral. I slowly lowered the piece of paper. I was not homeless, I was not a victim, I was the landlord, and my arrogant, entitled tenant was about to violate his lease in the most spectacular, financially devastating way possible. Not Pamela. The automatic glass doors of First National Bank slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss that sounded like a snake taking a breath. I stepped onto the polished marble floor, shaking the relentless morning rain off my heavy canvas coat. The air inside the sprawling lobby was cool, climate-controlled, and smelled subtly of money, floor wax, and power. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. While Douglas was likely waking up, hungover, and stretching in the master bedroom of the Victorian house he thought he owned, I was standing here, holding the only key that mattered. I approached the mahogany reception desk. I told her I needed to immediately access safety deposit box 402. She simply asked for my government identification and the silver key. "Right this way, Mr. Caldwell. I am sorry for your recent loss," she murmured. She led me past the teller stations, through a heavy security gate, and back into the main vault. She used her long master key, and together, in perfect synchronization, we turned them. The heavy lock clicked. It was a sound so solid, so final, that it echoed in my chest. She pulled the long, heavy metal box out from the wall and carried it to a small, private viewing room adjacent to the vault. She set it gently on the oak table and closed the heavy door behind her, leaving me alone with the suffocating silence. I slowly lifted the heavy metal lid of the box. There was no hidden gold. On the front of the file, written in my father's distinct, bold black lettering with a permanent marker, were the words, "The Caldwell Land Trust." It was not a rushed, frantic note like the one hidden in the Bible. It was written exactly 6 months ago, right after his oncologist had sat us down and told us the cancer had spread to his liver. I took a deep breath and began to read, "My dearest Richard." I paused, my vision blurring slightly. He had quietly watched from the sidelines for all those grueling years. All those years I thought he was blindly spoiling the charming baby of the family. He had been taking meticulous mental notes. I looked back down at the letter. "You always quietly wondered why I never directly confronted Douglas. And as a father, I simply could not bear to be the one to push my own son off that cliff while I was still alive." I eagerly turned to the second page. The will that Mr. the house, the detached garage, the physical building materials, the wood, the glass, the shingles. But 20 years ago, when I quietly refinanced the property to pay for your mother's first experimental surgery, I made a legal change to the title that nobody noticed. Not even Douglas's supposed financial advisors. I put the letter down for a second and frantically picked up the legal document buried beneath it. And looking directly at the beneficiary page, I saw my name printed in bold letters. Richard Caldwell, sole beneficiary. I went back to the letter, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. I shoved the letter aside and practically tore through the stack until I found the thick document ominously titled Ground Lease Agreement. It was dense, filled with intimidating legal jargon about easements, indemnification, and catastrophic liability. I rapidly scanned the pages until I found the specific termination clause. My father had heavily circled it in bright red ink. My heart stopped in my chest. The clause explicitly read, "This lease shall automatically, irrevocably terminate at exactly midnight on the date of the death of the grantor, Ernest Caldwell, without any requirement for further legal notice to the lessee. Upon termination, the owner of the improvements, the house, must either permanently remove said improvements from the land at their own expense within exactly 30 days, or forfeit ownership of said improvements to the land trust." He hadn't given me a piece of land. He had handed me a fully loaded, legally binding sniper rifle. The gorgeous, $1 million house that Douglas was currently celebrating, the house he was wildly planning to renovate, the house he was undoubtedly planning to use as collateral for his endless loans, did not have a single legal right to exist on my property. Technically and legally, as of 3 days ago, my arrogant brother Douglas was nothing more than an illegal squatter. Every single brick, every hardwood board, every vintage nail of that Victorian mansion was currently sitting on my dirt, without a valid lease. I know you, Richard, I am begging you. Do not do it. Let him show you his true, unfiltered colors. You can let him stay on the land for $1 a year if you choose. But if he treats you as disposable, if he throws you out, then you must use this. But remember, even a rock can crush a man if it falls from a high enough place. I folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and placed it into my inside jacket pocket, right next to my heart. The expired, deadly lease. I vividly thought about the parking lot conversation yesterday. I thought about Pamela maliciously laughing about charging me back rent for taking care of my dying parents. I thought about Douglas poking me in the chest and telling me not to steal his precious silverware. They were so worried about forks and spoons, oblivious to the fact that I held the absolute, indisputable title to the earth beneath their designer shoes. Ms. Reynolds looked up from her computer as I approached the counter to return the metal box. She asked politely if I had found what I was looking for. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine terrifying smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the razor-thin smile of a hardened general who realized the devastating war was over before the arrogant enemy even knew the first shot had been fired. "Yes, ma'am," I said quietly. "I found exactly what I needed to secure my retirement." I walked out of the bank and back into the gray, misty Seattle morning. The city air didn't smell like exhaust fumes and despair anymore. I pulled out my phone. He deserved an ambush. I firmly dialed the number for Leonard Katz. Leonard Katz was the meanest, most ruthlessly effective real estate litigation attorney in the entire state of Washington. And he was exactly the kind of bloodthirsty shark I needed to swim in these treacherous, legal waters. She put me through immediately. Leonard Katz's office was not located in a shiny glass skyscraper with a panoramic view of the Space Needle. There was an intimidating wall of locked filing cabinets and a heavy oak door that was slightly ajar. I knocked twice, and a voice that sounded exactly like gravel crunching under heavy truck tires told me to come in. I placed the heavy Caldwell Land Trust documents directly into his palm. He adjusted his thick, black-rimmed glasses and immediately began to read. Looking at the terrifying, intense focus on his face, I believed it. Finally, he stopped reading. He didn't look at me immediately. He slowly took off his glasses, carefully rubbed the bridge of his nose, and then let out a low, long whistle that slowly morphed into a dry, rasping laugh. He looked directly at me and said, "Mr. Caldwell, your father was a ruthless son of a gun. But my God, the man was an absolute strategic genius." Katz leaned back, resting his sharp elbows on the files. He looked at me with a terrifying, predatory grin. "Solid is not the word I would use. Richard, this is ironclad. This is a nuclear weapon." He tapped the deed with a yellow-stained finger. "You see, in the state of Washington, we have specific punitive laws regarding property rights. Most people own their property in what we legally call fee simple. That means they own the house, the dirt, and the air above it. But your father brilliantly severed that bundle of rights 20 years ago, right under everyone's noses. He pulled out the expired lease agreement. Douglas officially holds the title to the improvements. That is the legal term for the physical house, the garage, and the driveway. But you, Richard, you hold the absolute title to the parcel, the land. And under the strict terms of this ground lease, which officially expired exactly 48 hours ago, Douglas is currently illegally occupying your land without a valid contract." I asked him what that meant in practical, immediate terms. Katz laced his fingers together, looking like a spider admiring a newly caught fly. "It means you have him by the throat. In real estate law, the land is the dominant estate. The house is subservient. Think of it like a luxury car illegally parked in a private spot. Douglas owns the car, you own the spot, and the meter ran out. You have the absolute legal right to call the tow truck." He reached for a yellow legal pad and grabbed an expensive fountain pen. "I can personally have a devastating eviction notice served by a sheriff's deputy this afternoon. We will legally file an unlawful detainer action. We will give him exactly 30 days to either miraculously negotiate a new lease at an extortionate market rate that we dictate, or physically remove his property from your land. And since he cannot physically pick up a 3-story Victorian mansion and put it on a flatbed truck, he will be legally forced to forfeit the entire structure to you to satisfy the debt. It is brutal, it is efficient, and it is flawlessly legal." I watched him start to frantically draft the notice. I saw the genuine bloodthirsty excitement in his eyes. He wanted to strike right now, while the wound was fresh. I told him to stop. Katz looked at me, confused. His pen hovered over the paper. He asked why in the world I would ever want to wait. "Every single day Douglas stays in that house is a day he is illegally living on your property for free," he growled. I shook my head slowly, a cold calculation forming in my mind. I stood up and walked to his grimy window, looking out at the rain-slicked street below. "You don't understand my brother," I said quietly. "He isn't living there. He is scheming. He is expanding." I turned back to Katz and told him exactly what had happened in the parking lot. I told him about Pamela's ridiculous plans to gut my attic and turn it into a luxury yoga studio with imported hardwood floors and skylights. Douglas doesn't have the cash for that kind of remodel, which means he is going to leverage the house. He is going to take out a home equity line of credit. He has hundreds of thousands of dollars in borrowed money that he is about to eagerly pour into that property. He is going to fix the ancient plumbing. He is going to upgrade the dangerous electrical panel. He is going to install a brand new $50,000 slate roof. Katz's eyes suddenly widened behind his glasses. He dropped his expensive pen onto the desk with a clatter. The terrifying realization hit him, and his predatory grin returned, significantly wider and darker than before. "I see," Katz whispered in awe. "You want to deliberately let him improve the asset." I nodded slowly, letting the brutal reality of my plan sink in. "Exactly. If we evict him today right now, I get an old tired house with a cracked foundation, bad pipes, and a leaking roof. A house that I have to personally pay to fix on my fixed pension. But if we wait, if we let him play the big-shot real estate mogul for a few weeks, he will do all the heavy lifting for me." I paused, letting the silence hang. "He will wildly spend every single dime of his liquid inheritance, and every single dime the bank will foolishly lend him, to drastically increase the value of my property." Katz chuckled, a dark, raspy sound, shaking his head in profound professional admiration. "That is cold, Mr. Caldwell. That is absolute ice-cold calculation. You are intentionally going to let your arrogant brother bankrupt himself, renovating a multi-million-dollar house he doesn't own." I sat back down, unapologetic. I didn't feel cold. I felt ruthlessly logical. "For 35 years, Douglas took everything without ever asking," I said, my voice hard. "He greedily took my parents' attention. He selfishly took their money. He constantly took the credit for my back-breaking work. Now, he is finally going to give something back. He is going to blindly hand me a fully renovated, state-of-the-art estate. It is the only fair outcome." I firmly instructed Katz to prepare the aggressive eviction paperwork, but not to file it yet. We would wait until Douglas was sitting in his brand-new, luxurious kitchen, smugly thinking he was the undisputed king of Seattle real estate. Katz respectfully closed the heavy file folder. He was looking at a dangerous client who fundamentally understood the brutal rules of the game. He asked me what I was going to do in the meantime. I would play the part of the defeated, broken older brother. I would quietly watch. Before I left his office, I turned back with one final critical question. Will the bank catch this? Will their underwriters check the title enough before giving Douglas the construction loan? Katz shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Usually, a competent bank would, but if Douglas uses a private high-interest lender, or simply demands a line of credit, based purely on the inflated tax assessment, they will almost certainly miss the land trust separation. It is a rare, sophisticated legal structure, and honestly, Richard, banks are greedy. They look at a $15 million asset in Queen Anne, and they blindly want to lend the money to secure the interest. They won't look too closely at the dirt until it is way too late. I nodded. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost. I parked my battered truck 3 blocks away from the Queen Anne house, keeping a meticulous, hidden vigil. I watched the delivery trucks arrive like a coordinated military operation. I watched as a brand-new, obscenely expensive silver Porsche 911 pulled into the driveway, blocking the sidewalk. The bank had taken the bait. I secretly followed them to a high-end hardware store. I watched from the plumbing aisle as Douglas arrogantly slapped down a black credit card to purchase a $3,000 outdoor grill. I watched Pamela load her luxury SUV with hundreds of dollars worth of organic paint and imported fixtures. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt like a terrible, vindictive brother. But then I remembered the heavy Bible sitting on my motel nightstand. I remembered the 35 years of suffocating silence and unpaid labor. I remembered the cruel, condescending smirk on Pamela's face when she told me to be eternally grateful for living in a drafty attic. They wanted to play the part of the rich, brilliant, successful heirs. I would let them buy all the expensive costumes and build the lavish stage. The relentless Seattle rain does not wash things away. It simply makes the dirt significantly harder to see. But inside the sprawling Victorian house on Queen Anne Hill, the proverbial dirt was piling up fast. It had been exactly 2 weeks since Douglas arrogantly bought the silver Porsche, and the intoxicating high of recklessly spending amounts of borrowed money was rapidly wearing off. It was being quickly replaced by an aggressive, destructive itch. Pamela had firmly decided that the classic historical layout of the Victorian home was too closed off. She demanded an open concept. She used meaningless buzzwords like flow and spatial energy, while pointing her manicured fingers at walls that had stubbornly stood for over a century, holding up the entire heavy second floor. I knew exactly what was coming. There were no company logos painted on the side, no state license numbers displayed on the doors. The kind of vans that belong to desperate guys who strictly work for untraceable cash under the table and who disappear the second the city building inspector shows up with a clipboard. Pamela, in her infinite greed, had hired the absolute lowest bidder. Pamela had laughed in the engineer's face. She loudly told Douglas that all contractors were manipulative scammers trying to rip them off. She found some unlicensed guy on an app who confidently swore he could blindly knock it out for $3,000 in 2 days. I was sitting quietly in a greasy diner 3 blocks away, nursing a bitter black coffee and reading the local paper, when my cheap cell phone suddenly vibrated. It was Douglas. I calmly let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to hear the deafening silence on the line and wonder if his discarded brother was ever going to pick up to save him again. Rick, you need to get over here right now," his voice pleaded. It was at least an octave higher than usual. It was the terrified voice of the little boy who had thrown a baseball through the neighbor's expensive window and needed me to take the furious blame. I kept my voice calm, almost bored. "I'm busy, Douglas, what do you want?" "Just come over, please. It's the house," he stammered, panic dripping from every syllable. There was a noise, a loud, terrifying noise, and now the heavy oak door to the master bedroom won't close. It's jammed tight. I hid a dark, satisfied smile. That is exactly what unlicensed cheap labor does the second undeniable gravity firmly takes over the project. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said coldly, and hung up. I calmly paid for my coffee, leaving a generous tip for the overworked waitress, and walked to my battered truck, quietly whistling a tune I hadn't thought of in decades. When I pulled into the familiar driveway, the exterior of the house looked normal. It hung heavily in the air like a toxic fog, coating Pamela's expensive silk curtains and the new flat-screen TV in a fine, ghostly white powder. I walked slowly into the kitchen. Exposed live electrical wires hung dangerously from the ceiling like severed nerves. A jagged black crack, about an inch wide, started precisely at the corner of the dining room and zigzagged its way across the antique plaster all the way to the main hallway. It looked exactly like a bolt of black lightning frozen in stone. Douglas was frantically pacing in the middle of the rubble, wearing his expensive new leather jacket, which was now ruined by the white dust. Not the silent, dignified crying of genuine grief, but the angry, aggressive sobbing of a spoiled child whose favorite toy was broken. Douglas saw me and rushed over, grabbing my arm. His grip was desperate. "Rick!" Thank God, look at this mess. Those absolute idiots wildly started swinging heavy hammers. And then there was this deafening crack. It sounded exactly like a gunshot. And now the ceiling looks like it is severely sagging. I looked down at the floor. The beautiful, original hardwood was buckling upward under the immense, unnatural pressure. "You cut the primary load-bearing wall, Doug," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "I explicitly told you about this exact wall 10 years ago. Remember when we remodeled the pantry? I specifically told you this beam holds up the entire house." Douglas waved his hand, dismissive of reality. "I don't know anything about stupid beams. Rick, that is your department." Pamela said we desperately needed light. She explicitly said the guys confidently knew what they were doing. I slowly looked at Pamela. She wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara across her cheek. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. "Don't you dare look at me like that, Richard!" She screamed, gaslighting me. "They explicitly said it was fine. They said it was simple partition framing. You are supposed to be the family expert. Why didn't you warn us better?" The sheer audacity was breathtaking. And now she was blaming me for her cheap, illegal budget renovation disaster. I slowly turned back to Douglas. "So, what exactly do you want me to do?" Douglas let out a nervous, frantic laugh. "Well, fix it. You have your truck, right? You have your heavy hydraulic jacks and your lumber. We need to immediately prop it up, put in that huge steel beam thing you always talked about. I will enthusiastically help you. We can quickly knock it out this afternoon. I looked at the terrifying crack again. It had grown wider. In the mere 5 minutes I had been standing there, white dust was steadily trickling down from it in a continuous stream. I cannot help you, Doug, I said coldly. Douglas froze, his desperate smile faltered. What do you mean you can't? You are a certified structural engineer. This is exactly what you do. I sharply corrected him. This is exactly what I used to do before I officially retired. Before I was kicked out of my own home with 3 days' notice. Besides, I don't have my heavy tools anymore. This was a complete lie. My expensive tools were securely locked in the back of the truck. But he didn't even bother to check. Douglas's face turned a deep, furious red. He stepped into my personal space. Don't give me that absolute crap, Rick. This isn't a stupid game. The expensive house is actively falling down. Mom and Dad's house. You can't maliciously let it collapse out of pure aggressive spite. I looked around the room at the chaotic mess they had made. At the cheap, illegal renovation that had compromised the structural integrity of the entire building. This isn't Mom and Dad's house anymore, Doug, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. It is your house. You inherited it, remember? You greedily wanted the asset. You wanted total control. Well, this is the brutal part of ownership. Sometimes the roof caves in. Pamela stood up, kicking a piece of broken drywall across the ruined floor. You are despicable, she shrieked. You are doing this on purpose. You are seething with jealousy because we are making the house better. Because we have vision, and you have nothing. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Better? You hired unlicensed hacks to save a few $1,000s so you could wildly buy designer handbags. You compromised the structural integrity of a building that has survived earthquakes because you wanted an open concept for your obnoxious cocktail parties. That isn't vision, Pamela. That is reckless vanity. Douglas slammed his hand against the damaged granite counter. Enough, Rick, fix it, I will pay you. Okay, is that what you want? You want money? Fine. I will enthusiastically give you $500. Go vigorously get your heavy jacks. I laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound. I do not want your money. Doug, and I am not going to fix it. You need a licensed contractor. You need a city permit. And you better pray that the strict city building inspector doesn't casually drive by and see that dumpster in the driveway. Because the absolute second he sees this catastrophe, he will instantly red tag the entire building. You will be forced to move out until it is brought up to code. Douglas looked terrified at the mere mention of the city inspector. He grabbed my shirt, his knuckles white. You have to help me, Rick. We can't afford a contractor right now. We spent the cash on the materials and other things. We are tight right now until we flip it. Do this for me, for family. I slowly looked down at his soft hand gripping my cheap flannel shirt. I deliberately reached up and peeled his fingers off, one by one. Family, I repeated, tasting the bitter word. Family is the people you warmly invite to dinner, Douglas. Not the convenient people you call when the toilet backs up or the heavy roof caves in. You told me to leave, Doug. You gave me 72 hours. You told me all I deserved was a stupid book. I took a deliberate step back toward the front door. I am the boring guy with the Bible, Doug. I don't know anything about structural beams. I am a simple, retired old man reading scripture. You are the brilliant, successful real estate mogul. You figure it out. Douglas's intense fear turned into explosive rage. You useless old failure, he screamed, his spit flying across the room. You are enjoying this, aren't you? You want us to fail. You are nothing, Rick. You have always been nothing. That is exactly why Dad left the house to me. Because he knew you were weak. He knew you were petty. Get out. Get the hell out of my house. I stopped at the door. I slowly turned back one last time. Careful with that aggressive yelling, Doug, I said softly, a dark promise in my tone. The heavy vibration might bring the rest of the ceiling crashing down on your head. I calmly walked out. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the incredible, intoxicating adrenaline of finally, firmly saying no. I pulled out my phone and quickly called Leonard Katz. It is significantly worse than we actively thought, I told him, a cold smile touching my lips. They compromised a load-bearing wall. The entire house is structurally unsound. Katz swore softly on the other end of the line. Does this actively change the strategic plan, Richard? Do we need to legally intervene before the asset is destroyed? I quietly watched the heavy rain hitting the truck windshield. It wouldn't collapse today, but it would stand long enough for Douglas to bleed out financially. No, I said firmly, it will strongly hold, but he is going to have to spend an absolute fortune to securely fix it. He is going to have to dip into the non-existent emergency funds. He is going to have to max out the high-interest credit cards. He has no choice. If he doesn't fix it, he loses the certificate of occupancy. Let him vigorously fix it, Katz. Let him pay the extortionate emergency rates for a structural crew. Let him bury himself in debt to quickly repair the incredible damage he foolishly caused. And when he is done, when the check has fully cleared and the wall is strong, then we take it back. Katz loudly laughed. You are a dangerous man, Richard. I hung up. He was about to brutally learn that when you recklessly fly without a net, the hard ground is unforgiving. The heavy silence that fell over the house on Queen Anne Hill for the next week was not peaceful. The rusted white vans had stopped coming. If you actively can't see the problem, it doesn't exist. I continuously maintained my hidden vigil from down the street. And soon, the demand letters from the expensive structural engineering firms he had called in a panic and then cowardly ghosted when he heard their astronomical prices. Douglas was drowning. He would nervously snatch the mail, look around to see if anyone was watching, and then scurry back inside like a terrified rat carrying a piece of cheese that was too heavy for it. On a rainy Thursday morning, a visible real estate agent's sign appeared on the front lawn. It wasn't any cheap sign. It was a sleek placard from an exclusive luxury brokerage featuring a photo of a woman with perfect teeth and a designer blazer that definitely cost more than my entire annual pension. For sale, asking price. The $5 million. I quietly sat in my truck and stared at the number. He was selling a house with a compromised foundation, and he was asking for an absolute king's ransom. I called Leonard Katz immediately. He is selling, I said tightly. The sign forcefully went up. Katz loudly laughed, a low rumble that sounded like distant thunder. He is fast. I will give him that. He actively knows he can't afford to safely fix it. So, he is trying to quickly dump the liability on some unsuspecting buyer. Absolutely not yet, Katz said. Let him confidently find a buyer. Let him sign a legally binding contract. Let him accept a deposit. The absolute second he takes money for a property he illegally doesn't own, he crosses the line from a simple civil dispute to serious criminal fraud. We want him to cross that line, Richard. We want him to sprint across it. So I waited. And because the volatile Seattle housing market is a beast that defies all logic, I actively didn't have to wait long. The aggressive open house was an absolute spectacle. They had turned on every single light to distract from the dark corners where the truth was hiding. I parked down the block and quietly watched the aggressive parade of luxury cars. They confidently walked in, blinded by the fresh paint and the expensive granite countertops. They didn't see the legal landmine buried under the expensive floorboards. 3 short days later, the aggressive Solge, pending inspection sticker was slapped across the sign. I found out the intimate details through an reliable friend of a friend who actively worked at the brokerage. And because he wanted to confidently close quickly, he had agreed to an shortened, rushed inspection period. But the most important detail was the earnest money. The large deposit. In a deal this size, the large deposit was substantial. 50,000 large dollars to show absolute good faith. 50,000 large dollars that was supposed to sit safely in a secure escrow account until the final closing. But Douglas, being Douglas, had heavily manipulated the system and negotiated an early release of the large funds. He had spun some incredible lie about needing to immediately pay off a large, aggressive lien to clear the title quickly. The eager buyer, desperate to securely lock down the property, had confidently agreed. 50,000 large dollars was wired directly into Douglas's personal account on a rainy Friday afternoon. I was wrong. On sunny Saturday morning, a large taxi pulled up to the house. Douglas was wearing a wildly expensive floral shirt that looked ridiculous in the damp Seattle drizzle. They were loudly laughing. They confidently looked exactly like 2 greedy people who had pulled off the heist of the century. They threw their heavy bags into the large taxi and sped off directly toward the airport. Then I checked Pamela's public social media. A clear picture of 2 expensive first-class tickets directly to sunny Cabo San Lucas. The aggressive caption loudly read, "Finally, some well-deserved relaxation time. Huge things happening. Sold millionaire life by Seattle." I sat in my rusted truck and stared at the bright phone screen. They had taken the deposit money, and they were going to blow it on expensive margaritas and lavish massages in sunny Mexico. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. They were not greedy. They actively treated good people, strict laws, and solemn commitments as nothing more than minor inconveniences to be ignored. I immediately called Leonard Katz. "They are gone," I said, my voice hard. "They are actively in the high air. Cabo San Lucas, and they took the deposit with them." Katz was heavily silent for a long, heavy moment. Then he spoke, and his deep voice was serious. "Richard," he said, "this is it. He has accepted funds for a sale he cannot complete. He has illegally converted secure trust funds for personal use. And the exact moment the thorough title company pulls the detailed file on early Monday morning, the entire house of cards is going to collapse." Katz laughed. "Enjoy your peaceful weekend, Richard, because early on Monday at exactly 9:00 a.m., we are going to drop the hammer. By the exact time Douglas confidently lands in sunny Cabo, he might still think he is rich. But by the exact time he orders his first expensive drink, the furious title company will be calling him. The angry real estate agents will be calling him, and the panicked bank will be calling him." I hung up the cheap phone. The aggressive sold sticker was peeling slightly at the sharp corner. I started my loud truck. My greedy brother had $50,000 in his expensive pocket and was flying in absolute first class. But I slept significantly better than he did, because I knew something he didn't. I spent the entire weekend meticulously cleaning my old, reliable tools. Most importantly, I prepared my mind, and I closely thought about Douglas, building his entire fake life on violent lies. When bright Monday morning finally broke, the Seattle sky was clear. A rare, sunny day that brutally exposes everything. The kind of aggressive day where you cannot hide the cracks in the heavy walls, or the deep cracks in your own corrupted soul. I drove my battered truck to the title company's tall office building in downtown Seattle. He confidently pulled up in his pristine vintage Lincoln, a shark in a shark's sleek car. He gave me a sharp, aggressive nod as he confidently walked into the glass building. I leaned back in my truck seat and closed my eyes. I could almost hear the expensive phone ringing in Mexico. The conference room at Purely Title and Escrow was confidently located on the 42nd floor of the Columbia Tower. From the large window, you could see the entire sprawling city of Seattle spread out like a gray quilt. And if you looked hard toward the north, you could see Queen Anne Hill, where an broken Victorian house sat on a piece of land that was about to become the absolute most controversial patch of valuable dirt in the entire state. I sat at the far end of the long, expensive mahogany table. Leonard Katz sat directly next to me. He confidently looked exactly like a professional funeral director waiting for the body to arrive. At the absolute head of the large table sat the nervous escrow officer, a pale, sweating man named Mr. Henderson. "All right," Mr. Henderson said, his weak voice trembling. "We confidently have the eager sellers on the secure line." He pressed a button on the large speakerphone in the exact center of the table. The line crackled, and then the loud, aggressive sound of mariachi music and crashing ocean waves filled the tense silence of the cold room. "Douglas, are you there?" Henderson asked. My arrogant brother's loud voice boomed through the speaker. It was loud, confident, and slurring slightly. He had started celebrating early. "We are here, Henderson," Douglas shouted over the incredible music. "Pamela is ordering another round of expensive margaritas. How is the depressing weather in sad Seattle? Still raining, I bet. We are ready to sign electronically. Send the secure link and wire the funds. I plan on buying the most expensive bottle of aged tequila they have." Sterling stopped tapping his gold pen. He leaned toward the loud phone. "This is Sterling. Look, Douglas. I have a board meeting in exactly 1 aggressive hour. Let's get this done. I confidently assume the title is clear." Douglas laughed. "Clear as in loud bell. Sterling, you are getting an absolute incredible gem. Wire the money. $145 million large dollars, right? Mr. Caldwell, I am afraid we cannot proceed with the closing today. In actual fact, I am afraid we cannot proceed at all. The incredible silence on the other end of the expensive line was absolute. The loud mariachi music seemed to fade away. What do you mean you can't proceed? Douglas snapped, the deep panic instantly rising in his aggressive voice. The money is there. The annoying inspection period is waived. What is the problem? Mr. Henderson looked at the intimidating Katz, then back at the loud phone. Sir, during the final, deep title search this early morning, a significant cloud appeared on the clear title. It appears that while you hold the clear deed to the structure known as the residence, you do not hold the clear deed to the valuable land it sits on. I could hear Douglas heavily breathing. It was a heavy, ragged, terrified sound. That is ridiculous, Douglas sputtered. It is my parents' house. I inherited it. I have the legal will. Yes, Mr. Henderson said patiently. You confidently inherited the improvements, but the valuable land is held by a separate, protected legal entity called the Caldwell Land Trust. And we have received a formal, terrifying notice from the new trustee regarding the expired ground lease. Who is the trustee? Douglas screamed. Who is trying to sabotage my sale? Leonard Katz leaned forward. He didn't raise his deep voice. He didn't have to. Hello, Douglas, this is Leonard Katz. Katz? What the hell are you doing there? I am representing the sole beneficiary of the Caldwell Land Trust, Katz said smoothly. As of exactly last rainy week, the 99-year ground lease for the large property expired. The powerful trust has decided not to renew the lease with you, Douglas. Not renew, Douglas screamed, absolute incredible panic destroying his arrogant voice. What the hell does that mean? Katz smiled a cold, shark-like smile. It means, Douglas, that you have exactly 30 short days to remove your personal property from the valuable land. And since your personal property is a 3-story heavy Victorian mansion attached to a deep concrete foundation, that is going to be physically impossible. Therefore, under the strict terms of the original powerful deed of trust, absolute ownership of the structure will revert to the powerful landowner. The wealthy buyer, Mr. Sterling, stood up. His arrogant face was red. Wait a minute, he yelled, looking directly at the terrified Henderson. Are you telling me that if I buy this house, I don't own the valuable land under it, and the aggressive guy who owns the valuable land wants to kick the house off? That is exactly what I am telling you, sir, Henderson squeaked. The title is uninsurable. We cannot close. Sterling turned to the loud speakerphone. Douglas, you lying snake, you told me you confidently owned it free and clear. You took my $50,000 deposit. Douglas was panicking wildly now. His terrified voice rose to a pathetic shriek. Sterling, please listen to me. This is a mistake. A stupid clerical error. I will fix it. Katz, who is the beneficiary? Is it some greedy developer? Tell me exactly who I have to pay off. Katz slowly looked directly at me. I slowly nodded at the dangerous Katz, giving him complete, absolute permission to drop the absolute final hammer. The absolute sole beneficiary of the Caldwell Land Trust, Katz said clearly, is Mr. Richard Caldwell. The silence this incredible time lasted for 10 agonizingly long seconds. It was heavy, it was suffocating. Rick. Douglas whispered, his broken voice was shattered. Rick, is that you? I slowly leaned toward the large speakerphone. Hello, Douglas, I calmly said. I hope the sunny weather in Cabo is nice, Rick, please. Douglas stammered, sobbing now. Please tell them this isn't a sick joke. Tell them you are signing the lease. I spent the money, Rick. I spent the deposit. I can't pay it back if this deal doesn't go through. I actively go to terrifying federal prison. I leaned confidently back in my comfortable chair. I recall you telling me that you were the brilliant businessman, Douglas. You told me to read my boring Bible. Well, I did, and I followed the precise instructions hidden in the thick back of the old book. Sterling slammed his heavy hand on the expensive table. I don't care about your incredible family drama. Sterling yelled. I want my $50,000 back, Douglas. Today, if that money is not in my secure account by exactly 5 p.m., I am filing serious fraud charges directly with the aggressive FBI. Do you hear me? Fraud, Douglas was screaming now. I could hear Pamela loudly shrieking in the chaotic background, demanding to know what was happening. Rick, help me, Douglas sobbed. You can't do this. I am your loyal brother. You gave me 3 short days to move out. Douglas, I calmly said, my steady voice as hard as aggressive granite. The strict, incredible law gives you 30 long days. I think that is generous. The closing is cancelled, Mr. Henderson, Katz said. We will be filing the aggressive eviction notice directly with the strict court early this afternoon. Good day, gentlemen. We stood up and walked out. Behind us, the loudspeaker phone was still active. We could clearly hear the devastating sound of a fake life collapsing in real time. I walked out into the sunny street. I had not raised my calm voice. I had simply allowed the strict truth to exist. The incredible flight back from Cabo San Lucas must have been the longest 4 aggressive hours of Douglas's fake life. The aggressive repo man dragged the expensive silver Porsche out of the empty driveway. A short week later, I met Douglas at a greasy, cheap diner. He had nothing. I slid a cashier's check across the sticky table. It was for exactly $40,000. I will buy the structure from you, Douglas, I said coldly. For exactly scrap value, this check gets you out of the terrifying fraud charge with Sterling. It keeps you out of violent federal prison. He stared at the check. He took the money and drove far away, leaving my property forever. And on the restored, beautiful mantelpiece, I carefully placed the heavy old Bible. It wasn't a boring book anymore. It was the absolute deed to my beautiful life.